They say that over 50% of people enjoy a good scare every now and then. But what about a truly terrifying experience that stays with you long after the lights go out? What about 100 nights of horror seeping into your mind, whispering unsettling truths in the darkness? That's exactly what I subjected myself to. For 100 nights, I listened to the most bone-chilling, spine-tingling horror stories imaginable. And let me tell you, the line between reality and nightmare, well, it started to blur. The train rattled down the tracks, its rhythmic clatter the only sound in the vast emptiness of the night. The moon hung low, casting a pale glow over the deserted landscape, making the shadows seem even darker and more foreboding. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels was almost hypnotic, a steady beat that seemed to sync with the pulse of the night itself. It was a sound that could lull one into a false sense of security, masking the eerie silence that lay just beyond the train's windows. Outside, the world was a blur of darkness, the occasional flicker of a distant light the only indication of life. The train seemed to be the only thing moving in this still, silent world, a lone traveler in the dead of night. Inside the dimly lit carriage, a young woman named Sarah sat alone. Her eyes were fixed on the window, her reflection staring back at her with an intensity that made her feel uneasy. She was on the last train home, a journey she had taken many times before, but tonight felt different. Her reflection seemed almost ghostly in the dim light, the shadows playing tricks on her mind. She could see the faint outline of her own face, but it was distorted, as if the glass was a portal to another world, a world where things were not quite as they seemed. She was on the last train home, a sense of unease settling in her stomach as the miles ticked by. The familiar route seemed to stretch on forever, each passing minute feeling like an eternity. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that she was not alone. The carriage was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of the aging train. The sound was almost comforting in its regularity, a reminder that she was still moving, still heading towards her destination. But it was also a reminder of how old and fragile the train was, how easily it could break down and leave her stranded in the middle of nowhere. The silence was oppressive, pressing down on her like a physical weight. She could hear her own breathing, the sound of her heart beating in her chest. It was as if the train itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, a flicker of movement in the reflection of the window caught her eye. Her heart pounded as she slowly turned her head, her breath catching in her throat. Sitting opposite her, shrouded in shadows, was a lone figure. Its eyes, two dark, empty pits, were fixed on her with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. She tried to look away, to focus on anything but that chilling gaze, but it was as if an unseen force held her captive. Time seemed to stand still, each tick of the train's clock echoing like a death knell in the silence. The figure remained motionless, its gaze unwavering, a silent predator in the dead of night. Sarah's mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Was it a trick of the light, a figment of her imagination, or was there really someone or something sitting across from her? She could feel the fear rising in her chest, threatening to overwhelm her. She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to break the spell that held her in place, but she couldn't move, couldn't make a sound. It was as if the figure had stolen her voice, her will to act. The train continued to rattle down the tracks, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding within its walls. The world outside remained dark and empty, a stark contrast to the terror that gripped Sarah's heart. She tried to focus on the rhythmic clatter of the train wheels, to use the sound as a lifeline to pull herself back to reality. But the figure's gaze was like a magnet, drawing her back into the darkness. She could feel the cold sweat on her forehead, the tremor in her hands. She was trapped, a prisoner of her own fear, with no way out. The minutes stretched into hours, each one more agonizing than the last. She could feel the weight of the figure's gaze, pressing down on her like a physical force. It was a feeling she would never forget, a moment that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Time seemed to stand still, each tick of the train's clock echoing like a death knell in the silence. The figure remained motionless, its gaze unwavering, a silent predator in the dead of night. The train continued its journey, the world outside a blur of darkness and light. But inside, Sarah was trapped in a nightmare, a silent passenger on a train to nowhere. The figure remained, a silent predator in the dead of night, its gaze never wavering, its presence a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of the light. Dust motes danced in the weak beam of Michael's flashlight as he explored the musty basement of his newly inherited house. The house had been in his family for generations, a sprawling estate filled with secrets and stories. Michael had always been fascinated by the tales his grandfather told him as a child, stories of hidden rooms and forgotten passages, but he never imagined he would find himself in the midst of one of those very tales. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else. something unidentifiable and unsettling. It was as if the very walls were exhaling a breath that had been held for centuries. Michael's footsteps echoed softly, the sound swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone, that unseen eyes were watching his every move. He ran his hand along the rough-hewn stone wall, his fingers tracing the outline of a door. The stones were cold and damp, their surface uneven and ancient. Michael's heart raced as he realized that this was no ordinary door. It was hidden, concealed within the very fabric of the house. He wondered what secrets lay behind it, what forgotten memories were locked away. A door that, according to the blueprints, shouldn't exist. The blueprints he had found in the attic were old and faded, but they clearly showed no indication of a door in this part of the basement. Michael's mind raced with possibilities. Had his ancestors hidden something here? Or was it a passage to another part of the house, long forgotten and sealed away? The hairs on the back of his neck prickled with a sense of foreboding, but curiosity, like a siren's call, drew him closer. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay beyond. The door seemed to beckon him, its presence both ominous and intriguing. Michael couldn't resist the pull, the need to uncover the truth. The door was cold to the touch, its surface rough and uneven. It felt as if it had been untouched for years, perhaps even centuries. Michael's fingers brushed against the rusted metal of the handle, and he hesitated for a moment. What if opening this door unleashed something best left forgotten? But the thought was fleeting, replaced by an overwhelming urge to know. He fumbled with the rusted handle, a grating screech echoing through the silence as the door creaked open. The sound was jarring, breaking the heavy stillness of the basement. Michael winced, but he didn't stop. The door resisted at first, as if reluctant to reveal its secrets, but then it gave way, opening slowly and reluctantly. A blast of cold air, laced with the scent of decay, washed over him. It was a smell that spoke of long-forgotten things, of time and neglect. Michael shivered, the cold seeping into his bones. He peered into the darkness beyond the door, his flashlight barely penetrating the gloom. What lay beyond was hidden, shrouded in shadows and mystery. The air in the hidden room was heavy, oppressive, as if the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes pressed down on him. It was a palpable presence, almost suffocating in its intensity. Michael's breath came in shallow gasps as he stepped inside, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The room felt alive, as if it were aware of his presence. He shone his flashlight into the room, but the beam was swallowed by an impenetrable darkness. It was as if the darkness itself were a living entity, consuming the light and leaving nothing but void. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, the sound loud in the oppressive silence. He took another step, the floor creaking beneath his weight, and then he heard it. A whisper, soft and insidious, seeming to slither from the very walls themselves. It was a sound that sent chills down his spine, a voice that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Michael froze, his mind racing. Was it his imagination, or was there something truly there, something that defied explanation? It spoke his name, his blood turning to ice in his veins. The whisper was unmistakable, a voice that knew him, that called to him. Michael's terror was palpable, his body trembling with fear. He wanted to run, to escape the oppressive darkness, but his legs felt like lead. The voice was relentless, echoing in his mind, a haunting melody that refused to be silenced. His grip on the flashlight faltered, the beam dancing wildly as he stumbled back, his mind reeling from the impossible. The room seemed to close in on him, the walls pressing closer, the darkness growing thicker. Michael's breath came in ragged gasps as he fought to regain control. He had to get out, had to escape the nightmare that had become his reality. But the door that shouldn't exist, seemed to mock him, a silent guardian of the secrets it held. Chapter 3. My reflection isn't mine. The antique mirror stood in the corner of her room, its silvered surface tarnished with age. It had been a gift from her grandmother, a family heirloom passed down through generations. Emily had always found it fascinating, a window into the past, but lately it had become a source of unease. As Emily gazed into its depths, she noticed something strange. Her reflection seemed off. It was as if the mirror held a version of her that was slightly out of sync with reality, a shadow of herself that didn't quite belong. It was subtle at first, a slight delay in its movements, a flicker in its eyes that wasn't reflected in her own. She would raise her hand, and her reflection would follow, but with a hesitation that sent shivers down her spine. She told herself it was just her imagination, a trick of the light. Perhaps she was tired, or maybe the old glass was playing tricks on her mind. She tried to dismiss it, to laugh it off, but the feeling of unease lingered. But as days turned into nights, the discrepancies grew more pronounced. The reflection's movements became more erratic, its expressions more unsettling. It was as if the mirror was trying to communicate something, to convey a message that Emily couldn't quite grasp. One evening, as she was brushing her hair, she caught her reflection watching her with an unnerving intensity. The eyes in the mirror seemed to bore into her soul, filled with a knowledge that was both ancient and alien. A chill ran down her spine, and she spun around, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, silent except for the sound of her own breathing. She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead, her heart pounding in her chest. Fear, cold and clammy, tightened its grip on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the mirror held a presence that was both malevolent and sentient. She avoided the mirror after that, but its presence loomed large, a constant reminder of the unsettling truth she'd glimpsed. It was as if the mirror had a life of its own, a dark energy that permeated the room. Then, one night, she woke to a sound coming from the corner of her room. It was a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, like the rustling of leaves or the distant murmur of voices. She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was bathed in darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon outside her window. She could barely make out the shape of the mirror in the corner, but she knew it was there, watching her. The mirror was glowing faintly, and her reflection, it was smiling. A slow, insidious smile that didn't reach its cold, dead eyes. It was a smile that spoke of secrets and shadows, of things best left forgotten. Emily felt a scream rise in her throat, but it was caught, trapped by the paralyzing fear that gripped her. She knew, in that moment, that the mirror was more than just a piece of glass. It was a portal, a gateway to something dark and unknown, and whatever was on the other side was reaching out to her, pulling her into its cold, unyielding embrace. Chapter 4. The Final Voicemail. The phone buzzed in his hand, the screen flashing with an unknown number. He hesitated, a sense of unease washing over him. He'd been receiving strange calls and messages ever since it happened. He pressed the phone to his ear, his heart pounding in his chest. Hello? Silence. Just the faint crackle of static. He was about to hang up when he heard it. A voice, weak and raspy, whispered his name. It was his friend, Mark. Mark, who had died in a tragic accident just weeks before. He froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. John, the voice rasped. I need your help. The voice cut out, replaced by the chilling sound of static. He fumbled with the phone, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He listened to the message again and again, each time the horror growing, twisting its icy fingers around his heart. His friend's voice, a voice from beyond the grave, echoing in his ear, a final, terrifying farewell. Out rose Sleep Tight. 100 nights of horror, 100 stories that burrowed under my skin, took root in my mind, and refused to let go. The shadows seem a little darker now, the silence a little too loud. The line between reality and the nightmares I embraced has blurred, leaving me with a lingering sense of unease. So tell me, do you dare to venture into the darkness? Share your own chilling encounters in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to face another dose of terror, check out this video next.